Hello, everybody. This is Craig Klein. Welcome to the webinar. Appreciate everybody joining us. Want to, first of all, introduce our esteemed guest today, Andy Paul. Really excited to have Andy joining us today, and I know you guys are all going to really get a lot out of the presentation today. Andy's got a tremendous amount of experience that he's going to share with you. Andy's the author of some great books that I highly recommend, and he'll tell you a little bit more about in a little while. And more importantly, he's worked with all kinds of businesses from small to extremely large in helping them ramp up their sales. As well as Andy has a really awesome podcast that I was privileged to be interviewed on, and that's kind of how Andy and I got to talking and brainstorming. And I think what Andy's going to share today about some of the mistakes that a lot of companies make when they're trying to break through the ceiling in their sales or reset their sales is really going to be helpful. I really hope everybody gets a lot out of it, and just want to say, Andy, we really appreciate you doing this for us today. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to you, Andy. Take it away.
Well, great. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor to be here and to talk to your audience about sales turnaround, sales reset, that topic that's near and dear to many people's hearts. So let's see. Make sure I. Oops, there we go. It was just slow to respond to my mouse. So here's a great quote I love from Steve Easterbrook, CEO of McDonald's. He was brought in when McDonald's was in crisis and needed to be turned around. And he said, time is your enemy. If you're in a turnaround, by nature, you're behind. And that's so true. And what we want to start off talking about today is really sort of defining, when do you need to look at a turnaround? I mean, people tend to think about this in fairly dramatic terms, like when you've let go of your head of sales, or the company has had some sort of crisis moment. But I think that you want to think about this concept of a sales reset as something that really happens more frequently, and that the need is, when it occurs, is very urgent. And so Craig and I sort of brainstormed some, based on our own experiences, what we thought were some common symptoms of sales reset. And Craig, feel free to jump in, but gosh, not meeting your targets for 3 consecutive months, or maybe missing your annual growth goal, because there have been studies shown that if you miss even just 1 year on your growth plan, that it can set you back really for 3 years in terms of achieving the goals that you want. Maybe you had slower growth than was planned. Maybe you experienced a decline of revenue, for quarter over quarter for a couple quarters in a row. Those are all symptoms of what I call time for a sales reset. Time to sort of say, okay, we need to formally evaluate what's happening and take some steps right now to get things back on track. And so what we're going to do is talk about this in the context of opinions that and advice that have been given by many of the world's top sales experts, and I want to share that with you right now. So what steps should you take to reset your sales? Now, as Craig talked about before, I have a podcast, and we air 6 new episodes a week, and the show is an interview-based show. And actually, since put together this slide, the number is closer to 400. I've interviewed 400 world-class, world-leading sales experts about various aspects of sales, but I've asked each one of them this question: is what would you do? What would you personally do if you were in charge of a sales organization? It was time to do a reset, that you'd run into one of those problems that described on the previous slides. And we've compiled that recommendations into, or their advice, excuse me, into a series of recommendations that we're going to discuss with you, because it really reflects some of the things that you should be thinking about doing when you hit that hiccup in sales, because it's inevitable. It happens to every company. There's never a smooth path to growth. There's never a smooth, uninterrupted path and a scale upwards. There's always something that that happens along the way. And so when that occurs, what do you do? In fact, I know some companies that I work with that at least once a year they sort of do a reset. They reevaluate everything that they're doing. They reevaluate all their people, their strategies, their processes, and they do it proactively. So that's even another way perhaps to consider doing a sales reset.
Yeah, Andy, you and I, when we were talking about this, one of the other things that I don't know if it's really a sign or a symptom or a precursor, but it seems to coincide with sort of re-engineering the sales machine is, look, sometimes businesses feel like it's time for them to hire a sales leader, like in a small but growing business where sales has kind of been managed directly by the founders. And now it's time to bring in some kind of a sales leader, sales VP, something like that, a lot of times, so a real hard look at the process and re-engineering the process is the first step rather than the second step.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And as we're going to reveal here, I mean, there's lots of difference of opinion, even among these experts that have had lots of hands-on experience working with through this problem about what you should prioritize. And at the end, we're going to share with the listeners your recommendations and my recommendations about how to prioritize. But the key that everybody agreed on, 300 plus sales experts, was that speed really is of the essence. And one of the things that happens is that problems tend to linger. You may recognize there's a problem in your sales, you may recognize some of the symptoms that we talked about that might otherwise occur or occasion a sales reset, and we tend not to act on. We tend to think, well, maybe there's a better time. Maybe we want to wait till we bring that sales leader on board. Maybe we want to wait for some other event to occur. We want to come up with our plan. And the consensus among all the experts was, yeah, you can't wait, as you need to move. Action really is the most important thing, and doing it quickly, taking action that remedies the problems, really is the important first step. So we start taking these in order based on the breakdown of how the experts recommended their strategies. And the largest group was 31% of the experts said that assessing your sales team is the most important first step to take. And this really includes the managers as well as the individual performers. And the key here is assessing the individuals as if they were all new hires. So there's various tools that you can use, and we'll walk through some of the steps in just a second. But really important to say, look, what we're going to do is we're going to assess people. We're just not going to look at their performance versus quota. We're going to look at every aspect of their performance, whether they're a cultural fit to the organization, whether they have the aptitude to succeed doing the work that we're doing, whether they have the domain expertise, and really taking a fresh look at everybody. So one of the ways to go about the assessment is to interview your sales team. Again, treat it almost as if people are re-interviewing for their jobs. You want to get their opinions about what's working, what's not, what's working individually, what's not working as a team. Because selling is a team sport. As much as we want to look at individuals and say, hey, they're really responsible for their own success, these days, especially given the advent of content marketing and inbound marketing and everything that happens, there really has to be some alignment between what your marketing group is doing, your sales group is doing, what your development group is doing with marketing versus with sales. And so understanding what's working as a team is really important as well. And then understand the individual's personal goals and priorities. And this is, because one of the things that invariably happens when you have a little bit of a slowdown in sales or have a bad patch is you have to worry about the attitudes of the people and the motivations of the people working on the team. You may have some really good people that are in a slow patch themselves relative to their motivation about working hard, doing what they need to do. So as a manager, you really need to understand what their priorities are, what are their goals, and what can we do as an employer and as a team to help them meet their goals, because if they meet their goals, we meet our goals. And go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was just going to ask you, it strikes me that if I'm the business owner or the sales leader or whatever, and I'm trying to assess my own team, it's really probably pretty difficult to get much objectivity, right? Do you have any suggestions for that? Like how can we really sort of cut through the history of everything we have working together as a team and sort of being part of the problem, to really get some clarity?
Well, it's a great point. I mean, there's a couple things you can do. As one is part of the reason you're going to talk to everybody is you're going to use that as your research and sort of average, to some degree the results that you get. I mean, you're gonna learn through talking to everybody what is folklore, what's anecdote versus what's real. And then in some cases, some companies have done this is they'll bring in outside facilitators to facilitate some of those discussions, so that people feel a little more safe if they don't otherwise.
Yeah.
To have those conversations, because in all frankness, there are some people in the team that this may no longer be a fit, or may not have been a fit from the beginning, and that's part of the problem. And we'll talk about this later on in terms of one of the things that could be done is really tightening up job descriptions and job specifications, if you will, in terms of the specific responsibilities people have. Because a lot of times when there's a sales slowdown, you begin to assess your people, you find out that, we may have made a mistake hiring this person. And if that's the case, then we need to go back and look at our process that we use to screen resumes, to make decisions whether to bring people in for interviews, and then what we do in the interview and the assessment phase to determine whether they're a fit for us.
Yeah.
And this is, we just talked about assessments, is one thing companies don't do often enough is they may use assessment tools in the interview process when they're looking at hiring candidates. And if you're not, I urge you to investigate including an assessment tool in your process for interviewing people. It's not the end-all be-all, but it is a data point. And that's really what you're looking for, is more data points to help you reduce the risk of making a bad hire. And we could do another webinar on best practices for interviewing and hiring salespeople. But the assessments really become an important thing. But what a lot of companies do is they do the assessments when they hire, but then if they're using them, but then they put them away. And instead what they should be doing is on a regular basis conducting formal assessments of their sales team using those same tools. And so the same thing is you have to, excuse me, is you need to do if you have a sales reset situation is conduct an assessment of the sales team using these outside assessment tools, formal assessment tools, as if they were new hires. And you're assessing not just their aptitude, but then also you're assessing product knowledge and customer knowledge. Because this is really the period of time where you say, look, we've got some people that just obviously aren't fits going forward. Let's say it was either a mistake in the hire or something's happened with them that they haven't grown the way that you've needed them to grow and mature in their careers and aren't hitting your expectations. Then this is the time when you've reached that point. You can say, okay, we understand this is hugely disruptive to people's lives to help encourage them to find a new career, but you really have to do it at this point in time.
Yeah, and you may be going to say this on a later slide, Andy, but one of the things that I found is really powerful is when you assess the team, you can build sort of a profile from those assessments of your top producers, and then you use that as your criteria when you're hiring. So new potential hires or candidates, when you assess them, you compare their assessment results with the assessment results of your top producers, and you sort of know we need strengths here, and we're not so concerned about weaknesses here.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And again, for me, the critical thing is that the assessments are just an additional tool that you can use to help you make your decision. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we want as hiring managers is it's a risk. Hiring anybody in any type of job, but especially sales, it's the lifeblood of a company. It's a huge risk. The cost of a bad sales hire is estimated to be anywhere from 4 to 7 times the annual pay of that position. So I think about that from an opportunity cost and a lost revenue perspective. Bring somebody on, just the time you invest to interview them, bring them onboard them, train them, have them out in the field for some period of time to find out they're not going to work out. that can be devastating to some companies depending on the size of the organization. If you only have 2, 3 reps or something and one of them isn't pulling their weight, that's really problematic. So the assessments are not expensive, and they really help you, like I said, with another data point as to whether the person has the aptitude that you need for the job. So the next group, biggest group of recommendations from the experts was that the first step you should be taking is not talking to your sales team, but is going out and talking to your customers. And there's a quote from one of the experts saying, the solution to a sales problem is never found in the office. And so that means you, the CEO, you, the entrepreneur, you, the sales leader, have to go out and talk with customers. And it doesn't mean do it over the phone, though you can do some over the phone, but you have to actually get out in face-to-face in front of some of the customers. And this is fairly frequent occurrence, is that in my work with companies, I find that the senior management team does not get out enough, even at small companies where there's really no excuse, don't get out in front of their customers often enough. And I always call to mind that, Craig, I don't know if you remember that United Airlines commercial from about 20 years ago, where the CEO comes into the executive team meeting with a handful of airline tickets and says, we just got fired by our biggest customer today. Mm-hmm. And the point was, we're all sitting here in the office, we're not out talking to customers.
Right. And
so he had a ticket for everybody on his executive team to go get on a plane and talk to a customer. So in this case, when you're doing a sales reset, there's so much you can learn from your customers that really become data points. Right now, one of the problems we have is in sales in general is we tend to assume why things happen. And by talking to customers, you actually learn the truth.
Right.
And so what you learn from talking to customers is why they bought from us. The value they receive from our products and services. If they're going to continue to buy from us. Obviously, if you can minimize the churn, if you have a services business and you can minimize the churn among your existing customers. Craig, I know this is a huge concern for you, is to minimize the churn. You want to be able to do that. You understand what buying experience was like. What did we do well? What did we do badly? What do we need to improve? And then in addition to talking to customers, is you want to spend a little bit of time talking to past prospects who purchased from a competitor and learn why they didn't buy from us. And these really become critical data points.
Like you said with the churn, you can go talk to a customer who just left you, right, and find out why. What were they dissatisfied with, or what did somebody else offer that was better or more attractive? In fact, I was just listening to an interview, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he was one of the founders of Airbnb. Mm-hmm. And it was a really interesting story, but one of the points he made was that the two founders were, they had an apartment in San Francisco, and they were just sitting around working on this website, and they had a little bit of traction, but it just wasn't really taking off. It wasn't growing. And an advisor at some point said, had them look at where all their customers were, and it turned out they had a really high percentage of them in New York City. And the guy says, how many times have you guys been to New York City to talk to these customers? And they both looked at him like, what, are you crazy? We haven't been there. We're just a small startup. We can't fly all the way across the country. And the guy says, you need to go to New York City. And so when they did that, they sat down with their customers, and they saw firsthand how customers were actually using their product, which wasn't exactly the way they had designed it or intended for them to use it. They were able to fix some things and make things easier and improve the experience, and that's when things really broke through and they really took off.
Yeah, well, that buying experience is so critical, and it's increasingly being defined. When we live in this era with people having access to nearly unlimited amounts of information, or what some experts call nearly perfect information about your product and your service, is what differentiates you from somebody else. So, because, gosh, many of us, if not most of us, compete in industries where there's lots of competition and lots of people offering services that in the eye of the customer look largely the same. So one of the key differentiators when customers have requirements is this experience of buying the product or service. How you sell it to them versus what you're selling really becomes critical. And It's one of the big themes at Salesforce.com's Dreamforce conference this year is the buying experience. So really understanding that teaches you a lot about what you're going to do to win more business going forward, what you can do to win more business going forward. And it's important when you do these calls that you also then make sure your salespeople come with you. So this is not really a sales call, but you do want to use this as an opportunity to assess your sales reps because you want to see how they deal with the customers. It's not, you can't just assess your team by talking to them in the isolation of a conference room somewhere and having given an assessment test or looking at their metrics is also assess how they do when they actually have to talk to customers. When the rubber meets the road, are they able to tell a story? Are they able to represent the company? Are they able to be confident in what they're talking about? Comment, Craig?
What they tell you they're doing with customers and what they actually do is often quite different.
Yeah, and there can't be enough said. Taking this just away from the context of a reset, but in general, if you're in charge of sales and you're not spending some portion of your time either making calls on the road, if you depending on the type of sales model you have, either on the road with your reps in the field or listening to them actually make calls or listening to recordings of the calls they make on the phone, you're missing one of the great coaching opportunities, evaluation and coaching opportunities of all time. I mean, you have to have that type of exposure to them in action.
Well, and you're just probably somewhat misinformed or to use a stronger word, deluded, right? Because not that salespeople are going to always intentionally mislead you, but they have a tendency of telling stories that are as positive as possible, right? That's what makes them good salespeople. So when they tell you about their experience in the field, it's a little bit rosier than the reality.
Yeah, well, I think that's one reason. I also think that people tend to forget a lot of the details of what actually happens in a call, right? You tend to remember, if you have a half-hour conversation with a customer, and let's say you're having several of those a day, I can guarantee by the time you come back at the end of the day and you're trying to recap what happened, is you can remember sort of the big things, but you're going to have forgotten a lot of the details. Mm-hmm. And those details can be really important. And it can be minor things. I was listening to some recorded calls recently, and they're being made by a sales development rep, inside sales rep from a pretty good-sized company. That I know they're very well trained. I know their management team. And in listening to it, and I'm sure the rep would not have thought this was going on, but they were very robotic. They were very stilted. They missed lots of opportunities to ask some great questions, but I'm sure that if you'd asked them after the fact, how'd this call go, they probably thought, yeah, it went great. And yeah, the customer did agree to take a next step, but they missed all these opportunities to accelerate the pace of the transaction with the customer, missed opportunities to really dig deeper into the requirements and perhaps find a bigger need than the one that the customer is agreeing to go forward with. Lots of things missed. If it wasn't for the recording, they wouldn't have been able to catch it.
Right.
So the analogy is to game film that football teams use, pros and colleges and even some high schools, is the reason coaches go pour over the game film is that really tells them what went on. It's no longer just sort of trusting their memory when taking a note on the sideline. They can actually see. And the same thing is true in sales. Is increasingly technology is enabling you to do this, certainly for phone calls. But if you have a field sales team, you have to go on calls with them and really understand how they operate. So the next group of experts, third largest group, I was talking about basically doing a review and reset of your processes and take a deep look at your pipeline. Define and document your sales process. Now this is really a big one for me, and I might have rated this a little bit higher in terms of priority, is did a survey a couple years ago of about 350 organizations, and fully 3/4 of them had no documented, defined sales process. And so this, you may ask, well, why is that a problem? And it is a problem. You really need to understand, we look at this idea of the buying experience, right? We really can't define how we're going to affect the buying process if we don't understand what our selling process is. And so it's really important to understand all aspects of your sales process, draw it out on a piece of paper, understand how long each stage takes, what the handoffs are between various groups in your company, because those are friction points that can cause the whole process to slow down, and just map it out. And then once you've done that, then you can say, okay, now we can look at various aspects of this and look at how we can start accelerating our process. And also, these friction points, these handoffs, oftentimes that they could cause delays, have a negative impact on the buying experience. If you have a lead that comes in that's generated by marketing and it takes too long to hand it off to sales and too long for sales to follow up, well, the customer may think, gosh, I requested information, no one's getting back to me. I'm going to go to the next name on my list, which happens very frequently. That's completely avoidable. And it's a way that through documentation, you can actually see that that's happening and fix it.
Andy, this one is really, to me, sort of the crux of the matter for a lot of organizations. And I think that it's much more difficult than, it's very difficult for most organizations to really assess their process or even define it. I'm not exactly sure how to articulate why it's so difficult. I just see it over and over again with companies that they have trouble with that. Maybe just it's hard to be objective about your own, your own job, yourself.
Yeah,
I wonder what tips you have for really trying to get that on paper.
Well, what you do is start with one aspect of your process, and then build on top of that. And so when I work with customers and clients about this, the first thing I have them do is map out their process for responding to inbound sales leads. Because that's, if you're doing a good job, if you're spending a lot of money, like Craig, I know you do, is you invest a lot of money to generate inbound leads. It's a killer for you if your sales team's not responsively following those up. And so what I go in, that's the first thing I do is sit with the CEO and say, okay, here's a piece of paper, here's a pen, draw for me what that process is. Because I think that has to start at the top. The CEO needs to understand what that process is, because the biggest thing I see is the assumption, let's just take this one process, sales lead follow-up. The biggest problem I see is the assumption that it's happening, that the follow-up is happening by management.
Right.
Well, of course we're following up on sales leads. That's like breathing out and breathing in, right? We get a lead, of course we follow up on it. Well, it doesn't happen. The industry statistics and the research done into it are fairly compelling, saying that a vast majority of sales leads are not followed up. And the research also shows that there's a real premium. If you can follow up very quickly, if you can follow up within half an hour, your odds of getting that business are many times greater than if you wait for an hour or 2 hours or the next day. And this one study of sales lead follow-up said the average time to follow up was about 48 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well,
they're going to be too slow to follow up, and they're not going to do it enough, right? They're going to give up too soon.
Right. And they're going to give up too soon, right? And so that's what I think that's why I like to start with that process, because it's a customer-facing process that can be extremely well-defined, that you can put metrics to virtually every part of it in terms of how long it should take. And the impact is immediate. I had a client, I talk about my first book, Zero Time Selling, that had brought me in. This is a successful serial entrepreneur, and his current company was just floundering a little bit, and he was investing a lot of money and successfully generating good quality inbound leads. And didn't really figure out what was going on. He asked me to come in. I looked at it. I said, well, pretty quickly could see they just weren't following up on him. And so we made a change in literally 5 minutes that instantly 100% of leads were followed up within one business day. And the change was, we said, well, great, when the leads come in, the same process. They go to your sales ops group. They get put input into Salesforce.com. The leads get allocated to the reps based on territory. I said, here's the change. Is that you, Mr. CEO, at 4:30 every afternoon are going to log into Salesforce and make sure all the open action items for follow-up are completed. And amazing, just like that. 100% of sales leads are followed up.
Yep.
But it started having a transformative impact on sales, because once they did that for just a matter of a week or so, they started seeing greater conversion rate on the leads they were following up. And so we eventually got that compressed down to every lead was followed up within 30 minutes. And that drove the company to more than double their sales in less than 2.5 years. Just on that follow-up was the key. So it's extremely powerful. That's why I start there, because you got people that are saying, we want to talk to you. If they want to talk to you, let's make the most of them as quickly as we can. The next group, sales experts that by quantity, said the first thing they would do is go sell something. And that was interesting. I mean, because again, we talked before, is, you can't solve problems in the office, or some people believe you can't solve the problems, sales problems inside the office. But there's some interesting suggestions here, then some of which I think are really worth considering. Is one is for the manager, the new manager, or the manager of the sales team to personally go out and close the biggest opportunities in the pipeline, to model the sales behavior that they want the sales reps to follow. And I think that is important. They talk about going on sales calls with reps, observing them in real time, as talked about, listening to them make calls. Just increase the level of sales activity is one recommendation, which I'm not as big a fan of until you understand more what the causes of the problems are. And providing more deal coaching, I think, is an important one that's really overlooked in sales in general. When the impacts of a lot of the technology we bring into selling these days is that sales leaders, sales managers tend to be busy with things other than coaching their teams. And so one thing that you really have to pay attention to is make sure that you're allocating enough time for your sales managers to every day be coaching the people that work for them to help them succeed. I don't know what you see in your business, Craig.
Yeah, it's, making time for coaching is very difficult, right? Because it's one of those things, you can schedule a meeting with a sales rep, and, you're both busy. And if it feels to the sales rep like they're supposed to come in and give you an update on their pipeline and, report status to you, essentially, right? Then that's really what it is. That's not a coaching session, right? So I've always found that I may not articulate this to my sales team. I may call it other things, like we use the term one-to-one. It's just a meeting, a one-to-one meeting where both sides, myself and the sales rep, can bring up questions, issues, ideas, suggestions, whatever. So there's not a lot of structure there, and that really opens the door a lot to them presenting you with challenges in a more honest way, and you having the opportunity to coach them. But the point really is, you kind of just have to put the time on your calendar to spend time with Sam and spend time with Sally. And just go be there for them, sort of show up in their world. And if they're, on any given day or week or whatever, happen to be totally focused on preparing their presentation for a big pitch next week or whatever, well, heck, maybe you can roll up your sleeves and help them with it, right? But if you just kind of put yourself by their side rather than calling them into your office for a formal meeting, I think the coaching flows a lot more organically.
Yeah, great suggestion. Great suggestion. So lastly, there's sort of a bucket full of ideas, none of which had no individual one, which had a huge number of people recommending as a first step. But there's still some interesting recommendations that should be looked at. Is obviously looking at positioning and product market fit is important, but you're going to get some of that information from talking to customers. So this sort of falls in line with that. Evaluate new technologies. Yeah, for sales, at some point you want to do that. I wouldn't necessarily say you lead with that, but it is an important one. Look at your content marketing strategy. Again, something important, something that needs to be on the calendar to do, maybe not the first priority. Social selling sort of falls in line a little bit with the content marketing. How are you using social media to help build awareness and interest and initial connections that your sales team can have? More training. As I mentioned before, one down the bottom is fine-tune your job descriptions for sales. Looking at the fit of your sales team, a lot of times it starts there. We just didn't hire the right people. We didn't have our jobs defined well enough. And sometimes for some companies, defining their mission, understanding their why, and to use the sort of popular term, can be fairly transformative as well. I mean, it's you have to all think you're pulling together in the same direction, but sometimes until you sit down and go through, a project of defining that why, you may find out that you have people pulling in different directions, and that could be part of the reason why you'd experience the sales slowdown. So we just want to finish up with some recommendations. That my recommendations and some with Craig is first, put it in perspective. Is when you have time to hit the sales reset button. Is sort of following along the lines of what Steve Easterbrook from McDonald's said: is act, don't plan. Put the priority on action as opposed to detailed plans. Too many companies get stuck saying, I have to put together a plan, and the plan is, they hope for perfection in the plan. They hope it's going to be, the planning process itself is going to be eye-opening, and the planning should really follow the action. And then secondly is, you're going out talking to customers, you're talking to people, so know, don't guess. You're collecting data. Through your actions, you're collecting data that can help inform what you need to do going forward. And they're only going to figure out the data if you actually go out and talk to people that matter. So in terms of prioritizing, to me, the biggest thing is a little different from the experts, and I think, Craig, you're probably in line with this, is you got to go talk to your customers first. I think even before you talk to your salespeople, it may be somewhat simultaneous, but you got to prioritize talking to customers because they're the ones that are spending the money on your product. They're the ones that are making the decision, yes or no, that are going to help you. So start there. And then find out what you're doing that works. I mean, that's really, to me, is one of the key things I want to find out when I talk to customers, is what's working and what can we do to scale that, what can we do to replicate that, to do more of it. And whether it's something we do with our process, something we do with our people, certain type of people that are doing the right things, we look at all those factors.
Yeah, Andy, this is a really great point. Your customers ultimately are the keepers of the truth, right? They're the ones that know what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, And if you make the mistake of first having a lot of internal discussions and then going out to meet with customers, what you end up doing with the customers, I think, you can tend to try to validate the assumptions you've already made based on all your internal discussions. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you're looking for customers to confirm the decisions you've already made, rather than really being just a blank slate and showing up at the customer site and saying, hey, how can we be better? How can we add more value for you? So I think that's really key to make this the first step.
Right. And I think along with that, to the point you said about listening, is, when you talk to your people, you're going to form filters. And what you want to do is make sure you listen without filter. It's really important when it's that time, you're doing a reset, you're turning things around, is you talk to these most important customers, is, you can't have preconceived notions in mind. You just have to dismiss them and really learn the truth. Then assess your team and do it with a fresh eye. Do the formal assessments you had mentioned before. Think about, you're talking to people really as if they're new hires or potential new hires. But then also, when you examine the results and you're assessing the results, it's really important, especially in smaller companies, as you look at the results in context, in terms of the territory they have, the accounts they have. Because too frequently, and Craig, I know you and I have talked about this before, is too frequently in smaller companies, the first reps in the door have all the good accounts. And the people that follow, that you hire as you try to scale, suffer because they don't have the access to the good accounts or the good territories.
Mm-hmm.
And you you take those first accounts and their first reps that were in the door, that were getting those good accounts and who really were good hunters, and by letting them keep all the good accounts, they become farmers, and they lose you don't have your best people out hunting anymore. So you have to really look at all the results in the context of how you allocate everything in your company in terms of accounts and territories and so on. And then focus. And so there's lots of recommendations here, and you can't do all of them. I mean, if you took them one at a time, you'd probably run out of time because you're going to do certain things that you really focus on. And so what I recommend for companies I work with is let's pick one thing, one behavior, one habit that's going to become part of our culture. And the one I love is responsiveness, because that's one that doesn't take any investment to do. Is we can become instantly responsive to our customers with just a commitment to do it. Respond to leads faster, respond to and resolve customer satisfaction issues more quickly. And in companies I've seen that have committed to this, and we're even seeing today companies as large as IBM, that responsiveness is one of their key things they're focusing on, is it affects everything you do in a positive sense. And so find that one habit. It could be responsiveness. It could be, you practice unconditional support. It could be the way you support customers, that really focus on that buying experience and the user experience. But find one and really commit to it and have it, as I said, affect everything you do. And you'll find that it really will transform your results at the end of the day. Anything on that, Craig?
Well, yeah, I totally agree. I think change is really difficult, right? In a sales organization can be more difficult than others. A big part of that being that a lot of the folks aren't around the office all day, and so you really have to choose one thing and get it right, and then move on to something else once you really have instilled that one habit.
Yeah, and there's a study done by scientists at MIT about change and change management, and that's exactly what they had said is, when you look at integrating change into a process or changing a process, make one change, master the change, integrate it into your existing processes, and then pick the next one.
Right.
And lastly is just keep refining what you're doing. Document, define your process. Make sure that your roles are clearly defined, that especially the roles as it relates to how you interact with other organizations that support sales. Adopt technologies that can accelerate and leverage your sales resources, increase your productivity. Got to be careful because there's so many cool new sales technologies out there today that it's kind of tempting to get involved in too many of them. So you have to be really careful. Make sure you understand what you're trying to achieve, what's the right tool for it, and make sure you can document an ROI on it before you move on to the next one. But there are tools that can really help you, and you want to make sure you are using something.
Yeah, for sure. You were saying earlier about some of the other findings or recommendations of the experts were, the content marketing strategy and things like that. And it occurs to me that, this is where a lot of people really get lost on this journey, I think. You start looking at your process and you're gonna see a million opportunities to leverage technology and automate this or that. But there's a cost to every one of those technologies because that's just another change. It's another habit that you're trying to instill. So you can't do that and learn some new sales technique or introduce a new product, things like that. Like you said earlier, you got to pick that one battle to focus on. But if you define your process in the context of the buyer's buying cycle or process, and then start identifying content marketing opportunities, technology opportunities, and all the rest of it in that context, right? Like, I've decided this is what I want my process to be. Now let me find the tools and tactics that make that process work the best, make it the most effective, rather than hey, I found a really super cool piece of technology. Let's build a process around taking advantage of that, right? Which is the way I
Right.
think a lot of companies come at it.
Yeah, it's a great point. Oops. So now we can take questions if people have it, and we'll answer all of them. For those we talked about before, I have a really check out my podcast 6 days a week. Great interviews with world-class sales experts, entrepreneurs, people who've made incredible successes in their lives. Great learning experience, and I really advise you to check that out and check out my 2 books. So if we have any questions, we'd be glad to answer them. If you want to send them through the chat box, that'd be great. If something comes up after the webinar and you'd like to have a question answered, then here's my email address, andy@zerotimeselling.com. I commit that I will answer the question as quickly as I can, and really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Yeah, let's see. Carmen asked a couple of questions.
Sure.
And so let me try to synthesize those a little bit. One of the questions she asked was when we were talking about responding to inbound leads. She said, well, we don't have Salesforce. We're mandated to use SAP. I guess corporate.
Sure.
They use it all over the world or whatever.
Right.
Which, of course, you can use any CRM. In fact, Sales Nexus is one I would recommend, but there's a million of them on the market, and that kind of functionality, just, hey, there's a new lead, please call them now, that should be pretty basic in just about anything that you choose, I would think.
Yeah, I'm sure SAP supports that the same way. I forget the name of their CRM tool, but yeah, I'd guarantee that functionality exists in there, that you can take a lead, bring it into whatever your CRM system is, sign it out to a rep with an expectation of completion by a certain date.
Yeah, and then she said, kind of as a follow-on to that, she said that their sort of a maximum allowable delay in responding to a lead is 24 hours, which is great. It's good to have a ceiling on that. I would say that you want to tighten that up if you can. It depends on what you're selling and who to, but there's just no question. Faster is better. And Andy, I know you've seen the same studies I have, where there's this curve that shows that if you call a new lead within like 10 or 15 minutes, your odds of success are pretty darn good. But after even just as a small amount of time as 15 minutes, it really starts to decay very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a half-life of leads, and the challenge is for any sales organization, as I mentioned before, is when you're selling products that in the mind's eye of the prospects are largely interchangeable, and unfortunately that's the case with most product categories today. You differentiate based on how you sell, and so 24 hours, as Craig said, fantastic that you put a stake in the ground, that you've got a ceiling. But if you can accelerate that, if you can then demonstrate to the customer the superior buying experience, because think of it from your buyer's perspective, they don't want to wait.
Yeah.
Right? They've got a task to accomplish, and that task could be buying this product or service. So they want to be able to accomplish that as quickly as possible while spending the least amount of time and money doing it. And this has been documented as well by companies that have studied B2B buyers. There was a study done, I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, by IDC Corporation of B2B buyers in the IT space, saying they wanted to make decisions up to 40% faster, but they felt constrained by salespeople. So when you have customers begging you to go faster, then you're always going to be better off erring on the side of being faster.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that the best way for me to think about this, and just kind of always keep my eyes looking through the customer's eyes, I guess, is, like you said, if you think about your own buying experience, and when you choose to fill out a form on somebody's website, essentially requesting information or requesting a call from a salesperson or something, more often than not, you do that on more than one website, right? Or at least you went to 2 or 3 different vendors' websites before you chose one to request information from. And what the point of that is that if you make that customer wait, all they got to do is hit the back button to be on your competitor site asking for information from them. So it goes from an opportunity where you have a one-to-one relationship and you're the only vendor involved in the conversation to an opportunity where there's 2 or 3 different vendors involved within, an hour or so.
Yeah, I
So
agree,
you
and
just
I
have
think
to be quick.
well, one of the things that can occur, and I've seen it time and time and time again, is because most customers, not all of them, but majority of customers are looking to make what we call the good enough decision.
Right.
And the good enough decision doesn't mean that they have to go talk to 5 different vendors.
Right.
You may be able to convince them based on your initial interactions that you're the good enough decision. I've seen that in a case with another client where they were so good at their follow-up to inbound leads that they really eliminated a lot of the temptation for many of their prospects to go talk to other vendors because, these guys can do the job. I mean, they're so responsive. They'll be great to work with if they're this responsive after we buy something. They understood they answered my questions, gave me great answers. Yeah, why do I go talk to this other company? I'm just going to do business with them.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to follow up quickly, and then you want to keep following up. Make sure that you don't just send one auto response email and make one call. You want to try. There's plenty of studies about that as well, that most opportunities are won after the 5th or 6th contact. Takes a lot of
what you're trying to do is, and you have to think about that with your follow-up is it's a great point, people are so busy, reps will get worried about leaving too many voicemails or sending too many emails. And really what you're trying to do is most of those just going to be unnoticed by your prospects.
Right.
And, they've got a ton of email, just sort of go through. You're just trying to intersect them at the moment that they have attention to pay to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you do it more frequently.
So Carmen, I feel your pain. Basically her comments that she's written here in the questions indicate, I think I'm reading between the lines, Carmen, that you're in marketing and you're concerned that there's not too much sales process in following up on the leads that your organization is delivering to sales, which I'm sure, Andy, you can appreciate that. I think that's really common challenge, that you kind of feel like you're on the marketing side, you're just throwing these leads over the wall and you lose control over what happens with them. And also that means that from a marketing point of view, it's very difficult for you to justify the expense in the advertising and the things that you're doing, because you can't really, you lose trackability a lot of times. You can't say that this opportunity was closed because it was a lead from this advertising campaign.
Right.
And you also feel like a lot of times those leads aren't getting a lot of attention.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the big trends for 2017, it's not going to be finished in 2017, but it's really going to come more to the fore, is this whole idea of sales and marketing alignment. Mm-hmm. And what that means is, how sales and marketing partner much more closely in order to ensure situations like Carmen's describing never come up, right? That marketing is generating the leads that sales wants. There's a well-defined, crisp handoff between the two, that there's well-defined, crisp expectations in terms of, some companies even go as far as, negotiated service level agreements between sales and marketing in terms of, how the leads will be responded to. But even more importantly is that there's, this integrated communications on a weekly, if not more, basis between sales and marketing about, what's the content that sales needs marketing to create, the campaigns, how we integrate on the campaigns, how the leads get followed up, all those things we talked about.
Yeah, it's, in fact, it certainly, and it depends on the organization, and a lot of times there's sort of political difficulties with all of this between marketing and sales, for sure. But what you talked about, the sales and marketing alignment, that's a big part of what we're all about at Sales Nexus, is bundling the marketing capabilities and the selling CRM into one solution to make it easy and maintain the trackability and all that, right?
Right.
But the point is, it seems to me like it would make a lot of sense, just like you recommended the sales leader getting out and going on sales calls with the sales team. Well, if I'm a marketer and I'm responsible for putting together the content that you were just talking about, the best way for me to know what's going to really work is to do the same thing. Get out there and meet with some customers, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we're seeing, and certainly in sort of companies that are more on the leading edge of emerging sales models, that the line between sales and marketing is starting to get blurred. And I think that's to the benefit of all involved. And as we move into more companies embracing what they call this account-based sales and marketing efforts, then you're seeing even more tight integration between sales and marketing, because it's really focused on, we're developing specific campaigns and marketing and messaging for specific strategic accounts. And so it requires much closer alignment, much closer working arrangement. So it's coming.
Right, right. And one thing I just wanted to point out real quick, Andy and his team have put together a really awesome infographic that essentially breaks down all the findings from the experts that he's talked to. And Andy, you're okay with people emailing you if they'd like
Sure.
to get a copy of that?
Yeah, email me at andy@zerotimeselling.com, and I'll make sure you get a copy.
Awesome. And also, in one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that you have kind of I forget what you called it, but the way I remember it is sort of an assessment that you can do that's kind of you'll come in and take a look, interview a couple of people, take a look at the organization, and help them kind of see their road forward. Can you say some more about that?
Sure. I mean, it's sort of a one-day assessment of what's going on within a sales organization at this point in time, and be able to come up with a series of recommendations about what are the steps companies should take to, really along the lines of what we talked about today, in terms of really sort of a status and then a reset. And the reset doesn't necessarily mean 180-degree change in direction, but that we're going to make some changes to ensure that we continue to increase our performance and our productivity. And yeah, people are interested in that. It's a pretty intense one-day deep dive, but if you email me at andy@zerotimeselling.com, we can start the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's just a tremendous value, because just like we were just talking about with marketing versus sales, when you're talking about changing the sales process, the sales organization, that's going to be a really political, emotional, it's a big change for any company, regardless of what's going on, and whether your sales are doing great or bad or flatline and whatever. It's a big change, and it can be fraught with lots of sort of emotional decisions. And to have somebody like Andy, who's got the experience that he has, come in and objectively look at what's going on and point out for you, these are the top things that I would focus on if I were you, can really be very empowering for the team, because now it's not the CEO making a personal decision about all these people that he already has relationships with. It's you as a team saying, hey, we've had somebody objectively look at us, and these are some things we need to work on. So it just kind of changes the dynamic, I think, and it makes adopting the change or taking the first steps a lot easier.
Oh, I agree, and that's really why I call sort of self-aware sales leaders, self-aware CEOs have me come in, because they understand that dynamic, just as you described, that you need to get a fresh set of eyes looking at your issues, and a more objective source helping you with data points on the decisions you have to make.
Yep. Well, well, I guess that means it's time for us to wrap this up. There's some construction going on outside my window here. Well, Andy, I really appreciate your time, and this has really been great. And hope to do it again very soon. And for everybody that's in attendance, you'll be getting an email with a link to a recording of the, a video of the webinar and everything. So that'll be coming out here tomorrow. You'll get that email.
Excellent. Yeah, Craig, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. And as you said, I look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Andy. And everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.